So, today's lesson is meant to be a short review of 3 topics we've covered in class. Today we're going to look at correlation, trend, and as statements. For correlation, we're looking at the strength and the direction of a relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable. So we would identify a correlation by first its strength, and then by its direction. Now we have a few options for both. For strength, we can be strong or we can be weak. For direction, we can be positive or negative. When we're naming correlations, we can put the strength and direction together. For example, we can have a strong positive correlation. We could have a strong negative correlation. We could have a weak positive correlation. We could also have a weak negative correlation. So we're going to take a look at what these types of correlations would present as on a graph. We'll start out by plotting some points here, and then we'll decide on its correlation. So if we have a few points here that are presenting themselves like that, well, we'll start off by putting together a line of best fit that goes through our points. And we can see there that our points are very tightly packed around our line of best fit, and that they move from low to high. So the characteristics of this would give us a strong positive correlation. Alright, so there's our strong positive correlation. We're going to go through the other types of correlation as well. Alright, so we'll look at our next correlation here. If we have our points and they're a little more spread out, like that. So they still present an upward slope, but they're not as tightly packed. So when we put that line of best fit in there, our line doesn't do as good of a job of showing us the overall relationship. We would call that a weak positive correlation. We'll put up another example here where our points move in a downward direction, and we'll see here that our line will do a pretty good job of showing the direction and the relationship there, because our points are still tightly packed around the line, but this time they point downward. So this would be a strong negative correlation. Strong because the points are tightly wrapped around the line, and negative because it's heading downward. So strong negative correlation. We're going to look at two more. The first case, similar to what we saw before, but again, more spread out. So again, we're still able to show a line, but because of the loose packing around the points, we would call this one weak. And because it points downwards, it's negative. Alright, so a weak negative correlation. And for our last example here, we're just going to put our points. And here we see that the points don't really head upwards or downwards. They're just kind of scattered there. We can say that there is no correlation. Okay, no correlation. So to sum up correlations, we're going to go over each of the 5 quickly. First of all, we see a strong positive correlation, which is given away by its tightly connected points close to the line and its upward movement of the points overall. Next, we see a weak positive correlation demonstrated by another upward movement of our points, but much more loosely associated around our line of best fit. Next, we see a strong negative correlation demonstrated by the downward movement of the points and tightly associated around the line of best fit. And then we have the weak negative correlation, which again has a downward overall movement of the points, but much more spread out from the line of best fit. And last of all, we have a case where there is no correlation. This is shown when our points don't have an overall trend of upward or downward, and our line of best fit would just cut through the points. For the sake of trends, this course isn't going to go too far with the idea. All that I really am concerned with is that you're able to discuss the overall direction of the points. So, for example, if we had our points laid out like so, all that I would want you to say is that this is a downward trend. Okay? And likewise, if we have our points set up in a way that is giving us an overall impression that it's moving up, you would say an upward trend. Alright, so not so much for trends right now. All we need to be able to do is label downward and upward. Our last topic for the day is going to be a review of the as statement. And the as statement has a few components to it. And so we see that there is a general format here, and it's given to us in a way that allows us to fill in the 3 blanks. Okay? Now it always follows the same structure, and 2 of our blanks will always be taken from the independent variable and the dependent variable. We can see there that our independent and dependent variables provide us with our 2 topics. So as our independent variable increases, our dependent variable, and then we have our last blank. And it's this last blank here that can be based on the type of correlation or trend, meaning that we would either put increases or decreases. So we've laid out our basic structure, and we know what information needs to go where. Now we're going to look at 2 examples in order to actually write out our as statements. Our first example here is going to use hours worked and the pay that you would receive. So we know that if you were to work 0 hours, you're not going to make any money. But for every hour you work, you're going to get paid. In other words, you're going to see an increase as you work more hours. So, to put together our as statement, we first consider our independent variable, our hours worked, our dependent variable, the pay that we receive, and the overall direction that our relationship is growing in. In this case, we see it as an increasing relationship. When we put this information into our as statement format, we can see that as hours worked increases, pay increases, where hours worked would be our independent variable, pay would be our dependent variable, and then increases describes the direction that our relationship grows in. We'll take a look at one more example. So in our second as statement question, we're going to look at the speed that you're running and the time it takes to run 5 kilometers. So if you were to be running very slowly, it would take a long time to run 5 kilometers. But if you run fast, the time it takes to run 5 kilometers would be less. So we would see something like this. Now we can take a look at our speed, which is our independent variable. It's the thing we control. And the time that it takes to run 5 kilometers would be the dependent variable. It's what's decided by your speed. The relationship that we see is that as speed increases, the time to run 5 kilometers decreases. Where we have put in speed as our independent variable, time to run 5 kilometers as our dependent variable, and we've described the relationship, meaning that it goes downward. Okay, so that's everything for today's review. I will have an activity posted as well for you to get through some practice with trends and correlations and writing as statements. As always, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email.